religious leader, and an advocate for economic equity and social justice, Reverend W. Franklyn Richardson. He's senior pastor of the historic Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York, and chairman of the Conference of National Black Churches, which is composed of the national leadership of the 8 largest Black denominations, representing more than 80% of African Americans nationwide. Through his great compassion and unwavering dedication, he has galvanized a myriad of groups to tackle issues such as criminal justice reform, environmental justice, gun violence, and voter education, as well as provided counsel to major corporations and other organizations. I'm here today with Reverend Richardson to discuss his book, Witness to Grace, A Testimony of Favor, his deeply personal, highly acclaimed memoir, a story of resilience, strength, and determination about his own journey, as well as the struggle of Black people in America and our pursuit for civil rights and social justice. We will also discuss his focus during Black History Month on Build Power Week. Reverend Richardson, thank you for joining us. Really enjoyed reading your book, Witness to Grace, A Testimony of Favor. It's a fascinating book. And actually, I want to start off with why did you find it was time to write this book? It's a deeply personal memoir, but it's also an instructional book to audiences that read it. Why did you decide to write it? And who is the book for?
Well, the book, the decision, I think at the last 10 years or so, I have always been haunted by the importance of me putting my story down, right? And so about 2 years ago, I had major surgery and confronted for myself the first time in my life, vulnerability, my own vulnerability. And that caused me to say, well, I need to get this done, even though, thank God, the surgery was completely successful. But it was certainly a wake-up call. And while recovering, I said, I got to do this. I said I was going to do it. And the reason why I did it was because I had learned so much in my life and had been so exposed to so many wonderful things that I felt an obligation to pass it on to the next generation. I know I had benefited from so much that I've never lived. So through books and through biographies, I've learned so much, and it's expanded my own wealth and my own well from which I've drawn insight. And I felt I had an obligation to, given what I thought was a marvelous journey, to share it with not only my colleagues in ministry who will follow me, but also in this contemporary moment to insert the practicality of faith and spirituality into the discourse that is going on in our communities. And so I felt it imperative that I would do it. And that's the reason. I kept a promise to myself, and I put it out there, and I never knew how it would be embraced, how it's been so wonderfully embraced. Never expected that, but I felt an obligation to share the story because I had been blessed by so many stories.
Yeah. Actually, your book was released, and you wrote it in tandem with this great crisis that we're going through, this pandemic, and it comes at a time. And the reason why I said that it's almost perfectly timed. It comes at a time when people are feeling a loss of hope. Mm-hmm. They're feeling a loss of faith. They've been challenged both from a health standpoint. They've been challenged from a financial standpoint. There's been great loss in terms of, the lives of their family members. So as you look at your book, one, define grace and tell us how people maintain grace in times like these.
Well, one of the things that's fundamental to my idea of grace is that it is not narrow in its view from a theological point. I'm not just talking about salvific grace. I'm not talking about being saved from your sins exclusively, while I am talking about that. I'm really talking about the capacity, whether a person is a person of faith or practicing religion or not. I'm talking about the very asset of our humanity's connection to our Creator. And so a person does not have to necessarily be religious to be able to observe that he or she has been has had grace extended to their lives, because we much of what, if not all of what, we enjoy and are engaged in life has not been because we worked for it, contrary to what people think. So when I talk about grace, I'm talking about the broad sense. I'm talking about just getting up in the morning and knowing that the sun is shining and that you didn't buy the sun and the moon and the stars, your mama, anthropological grace, you didn't buy your mama. All of the so many things that make life valuable and enriching that you and I did not purchase. So I'm talking about experiences, I'm talking about exposures, I'm talking about meeting other people, and I'm talking about a one's relationship with God, how God's grace and favor. And if you have a spirituality, then you see the accomplishments of your life through the prism of grace and not through your own only. That's not to dismiss that you got to work hard and so forth, but even the very capacity to work hard is a gift. And the mind that you have is a gift. I mean, so when you see it through the prism, grace, you begin to see, and I would say also that you cannot see grace going forward. You can go forward in faith, but you can only see grace looking back over your shoulder. You look back and you see, boy, look what God did. I didn't understand what I was going through when I was going through it, but look how he's prepared me. Look how he's blessed me. So I'm talking about the big sense of grace, not the narrow sense, while at the same time I'm affirming the narrow sense that people who accept salvation accept a sense of faith.
Well, this is a book of reflection, and a lot of it deals with your own personal reflection, and it deals with your own personal challenges. And the fact that, you know, what made this book so accessible, you talked about the fact that, you know, there's been points where you've questioned God, or you've questioned why things have unfolded. You've had disappointments. I remember reading the chapter about, you know, running for the presidency of the National Baptist Convention and how disappointed you were, but that was a moment where you found grace. Can you share that moment so that we can, so you can communicate your own struggles and how grace entered your life at that specific moment?
Yes. Sometimes grace is born of sometimes our capacity to see grace is born of disappointment. I have spent 14 years in the service of the National Baptist Convention as General Secretary. My predecessor, Dr. T.J. Jemison, was the General Secretary for 29 years, and he became president. So there was a kind of precedence that the General Secretary had a pathway to the presidency. And so at the time of his retirement, I decided to go ahead and run for president with his blessing and with the blessing of many of the cabinet members and so forth, and the denomination. All of the polls and readings suggested that I would be a mandate for the position, having served broadly in the denomination. However, upon the election in New Orleans, I was defeated. And it came to be known that I was defeated because of the corruption of the computer process. And so essentially, I was robbed of the opportunity to become president. However, I lost by like 24 votes or something. But it left me very shattered, because in my preparation to make the decision, I prayed long and hard to try to get direction from God as to whether or not I should run for president of the convention. But I concluded that I had God's permission. I felt it was. And so I was very disappointed. But one of the things I learned later on, to my delight, is that yes, God gave me told me I could run, but he didn't tell me I could win. I was going to win. And so the winning was not God's purpose in my life. It was the journey to prepare me for greater things that would come later on. And so it's in that context that I saw grace functioning. You know, here I am disappointed, mad at God, upset about the outcomes of the election. President Clinton had come the next morning to congratulate me because we had built a relationship with, in this context of this interview, Earl Graves, who's my dearest friend, Earl Graves Sr., my dearest friend, he and Johnny Cochran and Darwin Davis flew down to be with me during the election and the night of the election. And just, so much was disappointing about that outcome. But in the long run of things, it became a platform for me to do more, much more, and to be exposed to much more. So it's in that sense that even when we are disappointed, if we hold on to our faith and wait and watch, God will show us that the things we most hate may very well be the things that he has sent to bless us. The thing that we have the most trouble with may be the thing that is developing us for some future endeavor. I illustrate that simply by saying to you that I was seeking to be the president of the National Baptist Convention, which was 12 million members and 30,000 congregations.
The largest Black organization in the country.
That's right. That's exactly right. But how God blessed me that the last 15 years, I have been the chairman of the Conference of National Black Churches, which is all 9 historically Black denominations. And John Bryan, who's a senior bishop of the AME Church, said to me, he said one day, and it hit me like flash, he said, "Rich, the convention turned you down, but now you're the leader of all of us." And so that's that took a long while, right? To understand or to see the manifestation of how that all works together. And people in their lives, all of us, have situations that we've come through, and we can look back and say, man, I didn't understand that, but that was really the best thing that ever happened to me because it opened up some doors I never saw. And so that's the way I feel about it.
So is that how the statement came about? Don't give up before the miracle?
That's right. That's right, Don. Hold out, hold on.
Because one thing that I got from your book is that in that experience and some of your other experiences, and I want to touch on, when you gained your calling, because those were other grace moments, is that those hardships provide lessons, one, and then two, grace is not about so much the destination, but the journey. So having said that, share with us some of those seminal moments in your journey that communicated to you that this was your calling. When you were younger, you had an operation for appendicitis, which had debilitating effects for a while. And then you had worked for a funeral home that further cemented that, this, being of the church, being of the clergy was a part of your calling. Share with us that and how sometimes we ignore our calling, but yes, God brings that calling back.
He ushers us
front
back.
and center.
That's right. Well, you've highlighted that episode so well. I in the hospital, I decided, because I knew all along, like when I was, my grandfather had been a pastor, and I think I got shaped and touched by that experience. And I always felt this calling as early as 12 years old, 13 years old. I always felt the calling, but I resisted it because it wasn't attractive to a teenager. I didn't want to be a preacher. I mean, that was dull and, not hip. If I saw my peers, that would be, that was not, that was not going to be. So I tried to ride over that. I ended up trying to be a doctor, but I ended up in the situation where the counselor of the school I had gone to told me at the 11th grade, I was working in the hospital with some doctors. They were excited about me being a doctor, and they were going to, if I got to college, they would pay my medical school. And I, it was such an amazing thing that when I ended up in the hospital and had the surgery and the meningeal adjustment, I ended up having a conversation with God. And that was that I said, now God, if you get me through this surgery, because I was paralyzed for a couple of days, I will go and accept my call and be a minister. I got well, and we reneged on that. No, I'm not going to do that. So I ended up one night at a funeral home, working in the funeral home for my uncle. And I walked in the church and these young preachers were down presiding over everything. I felt so intimidated. I felt so bad. I felt betrayal to my word and betrayal to my faith. I accepted that night that I would. I went back to my pastor. Long story short, he accepted it. He told me that the teacher at the school told me I wasn't college material, the counselor. Mm-hmm. And so I, disappointed again, but I didn't accept what he said. And so I ended up enrolling in West Philadelphia Community College. I flunked out the first semester. I didn't understand because I was still doing the same things I had been doing in school. But the truth is that I was having social promotion. I was quiet and no disruption, and they passed me right on through. So when I got to the college, I didn't understand why I was failing because I was still doing what I had been doing. But when I got to, my pastor recommended me to go to Virginia Union, HBCU, and they took me in on a conditional matriculation. That if I would, they found out and discovered that I was reading impaired. I couldn't comprehend, and even though I had graduated from high school, I couldn't read. They said, well, we'll put you in remediation for a year, give you a conditional matriculation, and if you succeed in the year, you can stay. Now, no other institution but an HBCU would make that kind of deal.
That's the value of HBCUs.
And so then I did do well. The long story short, to talk about grace, a conditional matriculation student, 35 years later, becomes the chairman of the board of trustees, and every degree has his signature on. That is grace.
Yeah. Wow. And along the way, as you said, at 32, Secretary General of the largest Black organization.
I'm telling you, man, just
in the country.
Unbelievable. And then to go from Virginia and HBCU and get admission and earn my master's at Yale Divinity School. When I walked across the campus, I pinched myself. I couldn't believe that this boy from the ghetto of Philadelphia was on the campus of Yale University as a matriculating student for a master's divinity degree. I mean, just recklessly unbelievable.
Well, it's, another part of your calling is one of fighting for social justice. And what I gained from your book, and once again, so timely, given the fact that, we're at a moment, at an inflection point, really, where we're looking at a renewed focus on, racial inequality, focusing on African-American advancement and mobility in society, dealing with the racial wealth gap, and all of that coming out of the tragic death of George Floyd, putting a new focus on it. And your book addresses some of that, but I'd like you to talk about what is the role, and you specifically talk about the role of the Black church in pushing forward the African-American community. And given this moment, what is the Black church's role in turning this moment into a movement? We've been here many times before. You've gone through the civil rights movement. You've gone through different eras where it was promising in terms of African-American advancement, and it seemed like the promise wasn't fulfilled. What makes this moment different, and what is the role of the Black church, and specifically your organization, in moving this forward and making sure that this is a lasting period of advancement, and not just one of taking 2 steps forward and then later taking a step back?
Well, I think it's a resolve to stay persistent and it's really a consistent. It's no movement in the African-American progress in America has been failure. Okay. It has just been a foundation for the next movement. No failure, and we are not. So we're at a place right now where I think we have an opportunity to move again forward, and there may be some other setbacks, but we'll be no failures. We may lose some battles, but we won't be defeated. because and the church has got to participate in the resolve to continue to not abandon the vision for full access to opportunity in this country. And so with the Black Lives Matter, with what we're facing today, the church has got to engage in it. And the church has got to always be asking itself, how can we remain? Relevancy is the objective of the Black church. That's what the Black church must be. It's always be its goal, is relevancy. Making sense to the journey of Black people and what Black people are going through in this country. And so for me, the church, the Conference of National Black Churches, for instance, we were in eight battleground states, making sure that the vote got out. We paid staff to be in there. Then we had 60 employees in Georgia for the last 30 days of the campaign for the Senate, in the rural communities, getting the African-American vote. My church and many other churches have been a testing center for the virus. As we have been vaccines, we provide vaccines for our community. We build housing. Grace built more than 400 units of housing. Right now, I'm feeding 500 families a week. We've given away over 175 tons of food since the 15th of March. We have young people coming to the church, even in this pandemic, trying to help them make the bridge between in-person and virtual, because our Black families are not technologically astute. And our children are going to be hurt by this. When this is all over, Black people's education was already behind. We're gonna be another year behind at least because of this broken system, because of the pandemic having to get us out and the switch to technology. We'll be behind. There'll be a gap. The educational gap between Blacks will increase. But the Black church got to resolve to be relevant. The message got to be relevant, and beyond the message, the programs and activities of the church got to be relevant. And they always got to be about understanding that we are building on a foundation that we didn't start this morning, didn't start with Floyd, didn't start with anything that happened today. It's been our continuous sojourn. We get disappointed when we have these moments where the topography is up and down, where a person like Trump and white supremacy emerges, and we think that, well, you have to understand that topography is often mountains and valleys, and there can be no mountains without valleys. So we had a great mountain with Barack Obama, symbolic, even if you don't agree with everything he said. We had a good symbolic boost, a barrier resolved with Obama. Then we came to Trump and we went down again. But then when Trump was over, we came back up again, the largest turnout of Black people in voting in the history of the world. So it's really always up and down. But we have to resolve that we're going to reach the goal of our forefathers and mothers when they said, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to be with my God. We got to be so resolved for all of those who came before us, who opened doors and who made things possible, and who gave imagination to our circumstance, like Earl Graves. We got to go forward. We got to build on their shoulders. Their blood, their sacrifice cannot be done. And the church has a responsibility to perpetuate that in our children and in the message that it sends.
Yeah, and this being Black Enterprise, CNBC has been very focused on Black business
Yes.
development, financial empowerment, and closing the wealth gap. In fact, the last time you were on a Black Enterprise program, we were talking about the payment protection program,
Right.
and making sure that Black businesses gained those funds and actually, signed up to be a part of that program. Can you share some other programs in terms of helping to fortify Black businesses or to strengthen us financially that the conference is involved with right now?
Well, Reverend Sharpton and I'm the chairman of the conference, I'm chairman of the National Action Network, as well as the Conference of National Black Churches. He and I have partnered when this pandemic was started. We created a stronger relationship with Senator Schumer, and we had direct input into the development of the pandemic relief package. When the package was first formulated, it had left out minority business, it had left out Black churches, it left out unemployment, it left out a lot of the things that were affecting Black people. And because he was open to our insertion, he had those things included and came to us and announced to the community that he had them included because of our engagement. So it's that kind of thing that we continue to do. Right now, CNBC received a $7.5 million grant from CDC, which was given to help deal with the lack of education regarding vaccines in African-American community. And they own the fact that they have not done a good job. So they asked us, I was pursued to see how we could use the churches to educate our people about vaccines, not just for the pandemic, but for vaccinations completely. Because in the African-American community, our children run into a sociology that discourages vaccination. While the white kid comes out, he gets the vaccinations, the Black kid doesn't, whatever the reasons, bad medical care, conspiracy theories, bad history with vaccines. 25 years later, the white kid doesn't have any of the diseases. We have all the ones we didn't get vaccine for. So it's not just the vaccination of this COVID, as is the COVID is not the solution. Getting over the COVID is not the solution to the mismanagement of healthcare among Black and people of color. It is only it's a moment that shows it, but we've got to deal with the greater systemic problem, and it won't be done in one season. It's going to be, so they've given us a commitment to a 5-year program. This year, we're going to educate 3,000 pastors in vaccines and in the history of vaccinations and provide for them materials to distribute in their churches. That's 10% of our population. It's 30 million. We have 30,000 churches. We're going to use 10% to try to affect all of the other churches in the denomination. So we are proceeding with that. We're also doing some new vaccines in 20 different states in partnership with CVS and trying to get the vaccine to churches in pharmacy deserts. You know, you talk about CVS, that's because we have urban mentality. But in the rural, our people don't have pharmacies. So, but they do have churches. And so we've got to get the vaccinations available in the churches so that our people don't get left in there. And at the same time, we got to educate past the conspiracies, past the history, so that we don't end up being, again, at the bottom of the totem pole in this current crisis.
That's an interesting concept that you brought up, and it was brought up in your book. Yes, you're going about using CNBC, coalitions, reaching out to government institutions in some cases, business organizations to combat systemic problems within our communities. But you also talk about post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Yes.
And how that sabotages our advancement. Can you define that for our audience and talk about how you brought together other churches to try to combat this syndrome so that we can continue our advancement in American society and within its institutions?
You know, the problem with trying to communicate that post-slavery syndrome is that it's an abstract. It's abstract. And you got to take, when I talk to white people, they really don't understand what you mean. Well, I'm saying, you can't think that 400 years of institutional racism not only has it diminished Black people's self-confidence and self-esteem and burdened them with despair and killed hope and diminished the capacity to dream and see a better world. It certainly has done that. But it's also diminished white people's expectations of Black people. And so what's the consequence? There's this fallout that Black people have to overcome out the door. They got this obstacle right there saying you are underachiever, you're a minority, you're not part of the society. And so we end up in being underemployed, having insufficient economic resources, we get marginalized education, and then when we can't support ourselves, we become vulnerable and victims of drug trafficking or other kinds of negative activities for survival, as the best that person can see. And then there's the consequences of health. You know, we have the worst, well, not just health, every measure of quality of life in America, Black people at the bottom. I don't care what you talk about. You talk about infant mortality, talk about diabetes, obesity, talk about economic, talk about education. I don't care what you want to talk about. Black people are at the bottom of the poll. So that is the kind of consequence, the victimization, that's the fallout of these 400 years. It's the fallout of slavery. It's the fallout, we never got over slavery. America never got over slavery. And so the slave definition has been consequently the legacy imposed on Black people by American society. So, I mean, that is really how that fallout is. We're overcoming a fallout. That's why it can't get fixed in 100 years. It's a longer journey than that to get it, to overcome it. And I pray that we'll get through it. Sometimes it's encouraging, sometimes it's discouraging. But as I said, the role of the church is not to let go faith, to remain resolved and encourage people in their darkest hour.
Well, this is a perfect segue for you to talk about what's going on this week as a part of Black History Month, Build Power Week.
Yeah. Well,
Share
what
with
we
us that concept and how that will propel us forward.
Well, during Build Power Week, we're trying to get our community to focus on how we develop power going forward. And so everybody in their own area and expression. For this book, for instance, we, first of all, in the Cyber Week, we gave 10% of the book's profit to HBCUs, United Negro College. But this week going forward, we are trying to, first of all, I used a Black publisher to publish my book, Church Online. And they have been wonderful. It's a Black publisher who has been just remarkable. I also have identified, even in the midst of this pandemic, Black bookstores that have the capacity to deliver volumes of books. So like this week, I'm having an interview tomorrow with the Mahogany Bookstore in DC. There are others, even though we lost a lot of Black bookstores in the pandemic, there's still some that are surviving. So this book becomes one of the expressions of how to build Black power, by participating, by supporting our own business, and sometimes it is very difficult. You got to overcome some obstacles. It's much easier sometimes to go get a white entity to do what you want done. But if you're committed to this vision of empowering us as a community, you got to make this the inconvenience. You got to buy the inconvenience sometimes. Sometimes you do get messed up. Sometimes it doesn't work out. But if you have a vision of the overall goal you're trying to reach, and not just your own immediate goal, you make the inconvenience. You do the sacrifice because you believe that ultimately you understand why we are sometimes behind the 8 ball, because we have not had the opportunity. We've not had the encouragement, and we've not had the examples of success. And so that is what we're trying to push in Black Power, building Black Power.
Empowerment is about linkages,
Yes.
linkages within our community, linkages with our entrepreneurs, linkages with the church, and this is powerful. And obviously we support that concept. That's what Black Enterprise is all about. Are there any other elements of your book, what you're doing with CNBC or Black Power Week, that you'd like to share with our audience as we wrap up this interview?
Well, I think it's an ongoing struggle. We always get up every morning wondering what we're going to do today, how we're going to try to make it better today. And I guess I really want to take this opportunity to celebrate my friend Earl Graves in this medium. I can't help in this context telling you how much he has meant to me, how much he has helped to develop my own Black consciousness. We were personal friends. We traveled the world together, he and his wife, Barbara. They're members of our church. I've known the family. Well, he was a great mentor to me. You know, I've had multiple mentors. I had mentors in theology, mentors in all kinds of places, but he was my corporate mentor from a Black perspective. He invited me to be on the board of Pepsi. And ultimately from then I became a part of the board composition of Comcast. And I've had a great sense of how to partner with Black business because of his contribution and his personal, when you spent hours with him and days and weeks close up, you can't help but absorb his spirit and absorb his thinking. And he's been a tremendous input in shaping me and his family example and all of that. We've been very, very close. And today I think about him all the time because he was a giant in every way. And I know your long relationship with him.
Yeah. Well, I guess for both of us, that's an example of grace.
Yes.
Yes,
Doc. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for the for the African American community as well. Really enjoyed this conversation. Witness to Grace. We're encouraging our audience to read your book. As I said, very relevant during these times, and very relevant in terms of making your connection, your spiritual connection, and knowing that as bad as things get, this too shall pass.
Yes.
And with it comes lessons and growth, and eventually leading you to the destination that you should be. In fact, during this crisis, we found many people created new innovations, new solutions, different businesses, and that's a part of going through the challenges. And so thank you, Reverend Richardson, for sharing, your journey and sharing your perspective on how we should embrace these challenging times and how we will eventually overcome.
God bless you, Derek. And you keep doing what you've done. You've made a significant impact and are making a significant impact.
Thank you very much. So once again, Reverend Richardson, witness to grace. And as they say, they said, keep the faith, but at the same time, you have to back faith with works.
Yes, sir.
So, take care.
Bless you, man. Take care.